Thank you. This is a first for me to actually talk at a forum where we're talking about the manifestos. So what I'm going to try and do is flag a few issues which I think in terms of traditional medicine we've had such a long debate on these questions and so much work on the ground. So this is a good moment to recall the work that is available already on the ground. We don't have to start from zero. And the fact that there are so many organizations, initiatives on the ground that have been experimenting with so many different initiatives. So those things can be brought together. What I'm going to do is to highlight 4 or 5 points on the lines of which we should push for policy to work. And those are both at the level of general guidelines for health as well as for specific measures. And importantly, that we need to see that initiatives that will be taken by both the state and non-state actors, that there are so many non-state actors which are doing very effective work, that the state needs to take cognizance of them. And everything, when we put, I mean, my understanding is that when we put anything into a manifesto, it doesn't mean that we are asking the state necessarily to do this. We have to remember that this is a manifesto for political parties who are going to fight an election, and we want them to take these on board. Which should not automatically mean that they are to take this up to make policy if and when they are elected, or to offer these as initiatives that they will take up as and when they are, or if and when they are elected. But also to understand that this has to become part of the political discourse which they adopt, which they work with, and political parties have a responsibility of an arena of power which is together and not necessarily confined to state power. It's something I would like to just flag. And I think that it's very important that we understand that they need to see that they are not here only in the business of trying to acquire power, state power, and then they will do things. So I think I think that should also be one of the things that we convey to them. But we can discuss this at some point if you think it's important. As far as traditional medicine goes, I think that for too long we've been very engaged with the whole question of the foundational epistemological differences between allopathy and all the other traditional systems. तो हमें लगता है कि मीमांसा के आधार पे ही दोनों में इतना फर्क है, और मुझे लगता है अब तक कम से कम बहुत लोगों को समझ में आता है कि ये जो फर्क है दोनों में, इसको हम instead of seeing it as a big disadvantage, we see it as an advantage. That it is possible within the traditional medical systems to look at both preventive and promotive aspects of healthcare, and that when we are talking about giving traditional medical knowledge a boost, we are talking about enabling an understanding of health which is outside of just, we are talking about enabling an understanding of health which is simply dependent on a health system which is outside of the functioning of the way that society functions. But that within, so what Nirmalji said, and so many initiatives on the ground, that people understand health as something that they can have control about. That's why I like the term health swaraj so much, because we have to think about health as something that people can, to a great extent, have control over themselves, for which they don't need to run to a physician for everything. This is, I think, a very important dimension that traditional medical knowledge provides, and we all are very aware that the ecology and the economy that support the understanding of. So if the forests are being denuded and people are being removed from their place of origin, where they are familiar with plants with their medicinal properties and so on. So that's going to be a logical corollary, that people become then alienated from the ability to look after their own health. So I think that wherever at least people are still located, if we can push for the local healthcare as it exists, to focus on the medical knowledge that continues to exist, that is still available, and at least keep it where it is, and not destroy it further and push the alienation further, simply because they have huge potential for preventive healthcare and promoting that. And when I'm saying preventive, everyone here understands that, I'm sure. And this year, I'll come back to it at the end, but I think the point that my friend made earlier, she said that, the questions of nutrition and so on are, we understand that they have to be in different manifestos. But I think it's high time we started saying that, you can't afford to say that, वो agriculture वाले manifesto में आएगा, और ये health वाले manifesto में आएगा. इंसान तो वही है, जो बीमार पड़ेगा और जो खाएगा और जिसका पोषण होना है, इंसान तो वही है ना. तो हम लोग ये जो एक प्रशासनिक विभाजन है इन सब चीज़ों का, वो हमारे राजनीतिक विभाजन होने की ज़रूरत है. And I think that's something that we need to push. And there's no point in being overwhelmed by the idea that there are these bureaucratic and administrative differences, and we have subscribed to them. The point is, if you're having a discussion on manifestos, it is to influence the discourse of manifestos and to say that, let's start talking politics differently. And I think this is one aspect which needs to be highlighted. Also because we are not talking from ground zero. We all know here, around the table are people who are very, very familiar with a lot of work that's happening on the ground. I will just refer to something that I'm sure will ring bells for everyone. But a program that I just saw in Madhubani district last month, where women, very, very poor, so-called, and very marginalized communities of women who are running their households because none of the men in the village are there. They have moved out to look for work in the cities. But they have been part of a program in which they are growing their own food. So nutrition, sanitation, nutrition and medicine go together. And it's in one plot of land where the women are creating compost, they are growing their own vegetables and medicinal plants and learning about how to use them. And that has actually, by that work done by that group over there, has actually shown how much difference it makes. So I think that we need to say that if so many non-state actors across the country can do work like this, which have very good results, then why is it that we cannot push the state, A, to recognize that this kind of work has its value and stop making artificial divisions between different kinds of initiatives for people. And second, where there has to be support for non-state actors and for the state to own these kinds of initiatives. And to say that, and existing programs can be adapted, they can be, I know that, people who work in bureaucracy have to tell us how it has to be done. But I think our job is to push, to say we'd much rather have these kinds of outcomes where these things are integrated and people understand the linkages between the three things, sanitation, medicine and nutrition, than not. So discussion on the manifesto, on the health manifesto, needs to push this kind of thing. The third point that I want to say about, which is three more points that I want to say integral to traditional medical knowledge and its institutionalization. We know again that across the country, different kinds of legitimation practices of folk healers has been ongoing now for more than 2 decades, 3 in some cases. The legitimation practices include codification of folk health work, their knowledge, their context. These codification practices are evolved from the ground in most contexts. They follow a protocol of rigor which has been thrown up by the context in which that work is going on. And it shows that there's great creativity and great initiative that is possible when people consider this issue of great importance. So wherever people have taken these kinds of initiatives, we really need to incorporate them. Now, in many cases, they have been incorporated into policy. They are functioning. I think that this legitimation practice, we should slowly push for the divisions within the traditional medical knowledge to be actually overcome. We all know that Ayush is a deeply divided arena. I don't hesitate to say this because I'm sure everyone here recognizes that. And those divisions are artificially created, their hierarchies are reinstated continuously. And I think that we need to begin to see that there's no point in these kinds of hierarchies and deep divisions. It's something that we need to work towards. We need to work towards how they can be overcome, and people can work in complementarity rather than constantly showing one kind of one-upmanship on knowledge systems. And the division within the Ayush systems is actually manifest most in the entire Ayush lot, then looking down upon folk practitioners, local health traditions. And there has been plenty of influence and lobbying that has happened with the ministry such that local health traditions have gained legitimacy. That has happened for a long time. However, on the ground, that the legitimacy needs to be now recognized and become part and parcel of the way in which we seek healthcare to work. I think that's a very important point that we need to push for political parties to begin to see that these are very important issues that are solvable, and there's no one size fits all. We need to find different kinds of solutions in different contexts, but then that is the business of those in politics as well, to try and find these kinds of solutions. That's something that we need to push. Production of traditional medicines, very important arena. We've had a huge commercialization of medicines in the last, in the post-colonial years. All we've seen a very big commercialization, and those have had their issues. And we've had policy interventions in terms of creating good practices and so on and so forth. But one of the most important things that comes out of the issue of commercialization, or the production of mass production of traditional medicines, is that at the end of it, does it make traditional medicines more accessible to the poor in this country? And that is not the case, because, and that's no surprise, because if the production of traditional medicine is going to be done exactly according to the parameters of modern pharmaceutical industry, then it is going to follow the trajectory of the modern pharmaceutical industry. It is not going to access. And there too, there have been many interesting interventions. So many community organizations that work on the ground are talking about local production, with local local production of medicines with locally available materials. That's a very crucial point, which is also about which is also linked to the idea of sustainable harvesting of medicinal plants and so on, which are a very important concern. So I think that local production is something that needs to be encouraged, and that's something that, I mean, it used to be part of the earliest Ayush interventions. Long before Ayush was formed as a ministry, state pharmacies were created, and if you see, as I have done just a little bit, state pharmacies don't function. So there is this decentralization of medicine production, which would benefit people and would certainly benefit the poor. And now, not in this mass-produced manner, but in a large number of very creative ways that people are making medicines locally for local people.
Would you suggest that village health cooperative type of body would be an appropriate way of...
In some places, certainly that would be the case. Absolutely. And I think there too, I hesitate to make, as you say, it would be one kind of thing. In different places, different kinds of organizations would work. But local production of some kind or the other, which can be generated locally. This is a very important, and mind you, given the way the debate is going, 15, 20 years down the line, people will be saying, of course it was the most obvious thing to do. I see no reason why we should not think of it now, because producing locally and consuming locally is the one important way out of. And the interesting thing is, I'm sorry, I think I'm taking more time than I should. So, okay, I'll come back to it if there are questions raised. Just one more point on research. Vimalji said research is necessary. I would say, yes, of course, nobody can deny research is necessary. But even more important is the parameters on which research is done. We assume that if modern scientific research is to be done, then modern science offers all the parameters. That is not the case. All these knowledge systems, when they have been worked upon systematically, offer very rigorous and insightful alternative parameters of research. Ultimately, what is it that we want? We want good quality medicines for people to heal at any point in time. And that is possible when we have research which is adapted to those medical knowledge systems. That has not happened easily. The default is to use protocols that are already available for the modern medicine. And I think that that's something that we need to push. That again has happened in government on that. But that is an aspect that needs to be pushed much more if we are to find a kind of rigor in traditional medical knowledge, which is actually possible and which many people have worked on already, but now should be available to the majority of the people to whom it belongs. Thank you.
Thank you. So,